Hey guys, Nishquick here. So today I'm going to be doing things a little bit differently. So since you guys know, I've already mentioned this before, it's The Legend of Zelda's 35th anniversary. It's a momentous occasion. So I thought I would do something to celebrate, but something a little different. So today I'm going to be analyzing the HUDs of Zelda, as the title suggests. So what are HUDs or HUDs? So the HUDs are the heads-up display, sort of like the user interface or the UI of your game. And I'll go into detail about that a little later. So, since the Zelda series is so treasured to me, I thought I would go into detail on it a little more, just analyze something that's so integral to the series. And this is an adaptation of an article I wrote on a website that I created. So, I'll leave the link for that in the description down below so you guys can check that out. You guys definitely should. So, without further ado, let's get started. So the HUD and UI of a game can consist of a health bar, currency count, stamina meters, items that you're using and consuming, etc, etc. In the Zelda games, these are very integral factors in your adventure throughout Hyrule, as they stay visible throughout the entirety of the gameplay. The overall workings of these visual factors, as well as how the player must navigate to perform certain tasks, truly come together to make the series the great franchise that it is known to be. I'll be analyzing the look and interaction, the level of distraction it brings to the player, as well as the seamless experience it can be to navigate and interact with the visual elements of each game in question. It's dangerous to go alone. Let's do this together. Zelda 1 for the NES. The one that started it all, The Legend of Zelda. Zelda 1 has a pretty basic yet effective HUD. The first game established some very long-lasting staples to the franchise, such as showing a bar with Link's hearts, which is his health, the player's rupee count, which is his currency, and most importantly, items that can be assigned to specific buttons. Though the NES only had two main face buttons, the fact that individual items such as your boomerang, bow, and bombs could be assigned to your face buttons was a revolution in the action-adventure genre. Showing the count for your rupees, keys, and bombs was a nice addition as well, so the player doesn't have to go back to the pause menu to see how many they have. I personally think one of the most important parts of the interface implemented in Zelda 1 is the inclusion of the map on the top of your screen. This was useful in dungeons and the overworld and orienting yourself in the world of Hyrule, and it's nice that the player doesn't have to pause the game every time the map needs to be accessed. A Link to the Past for the SNES. I feel as though A Link to the Past is the true successor to Zelda 1, since Zelda 2 was a side-scrolling RPG. When it comes to the UI and the HUD, there's some minor but influential changes. First of all, the SNES added two new face buttons, the X and Y button, which lead the B button to be dedicated entirely to the sword, and the A button to be the first ever action button in the series that performs actions such as picking up objects, running and interacting with NPCs and signs, and otherwise being used for the Pegasus boots to dash. Y is the item assign button, while X is to pull up the overworld map, which is surprisingly helpful, though unfortunately it brings the game to a standstill. A Link to the Past also introduces the magic meter, which is a very handy to have as part of the HUD, though it's important to note its vertical orientation in this title. A Link to the Past again reuses the idea of displaying Link's bombs and rupees, like in Zelda 1, but instead of keys, the third indicator is for arrows. Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, originals and remakes, for the N64 and 3DS. These two games were beyond revolutionary for the N64. From introducing lock-on targeting to a formal open world to just flat out bringing the Zelda franchise into 3D, Ocarina and Majora deserve all the praise given to them. When it comes to the HUDs though, well, there's a lot to be desired. These two games have every face button on the N64 controller as part of the HUD. The A and B buttons is the action buttons and sword button respectively, and the 3 C buttons that can be assigned to items. In my opinion, the A and B buttons stick out like a sore thumb, with their placement at the top of the screen and are a tad bit of a distraction to the player. From my experience with A Link to the Past, I feel as though the A and B buttons shouldn't be present as a constant visible reminder to the player after figuring out exactly what they do. The B button is simple to understand. It's for the sword, and that's its only use. The A button, on the other hand, would normally tell the player what to do: climb, roll, read, put away, etc. But after a few small hints from your fairy companion Navi, I know, this could add to her annoying nature, I know. These commands and actions could be easily learned and remembered by the player for future use in the game. On the other hand, the inclusion of the C buttons are integral to the user interface. The player should not have to memorize the placement of their items on the C buttons, and the visual indication the game helps provides a lot. The magic meter is also back, but this time it's horizontal since the Link can upgrade it, increasing the length of the meter. The menus, on the other hand, are its own story. The start menu is divided into 4 panels: map, quest, status, gear/equipment, and items. The 4 panels work in tandem very well and provide the player with proper information and feedback when interacting with them. The problem occurs when using some of the gear in the equipment section. In certain dungeons, such as the Water Temple and the Shadow Temple, the game requires Link to equip either the Iron Boots or the Hover Boots to complete a task. Let's say you're in the Water Temple. You want to sink down using the Iron Boots. The player must pause the game, scroll to the equipment screen, equip the boots, unpause the game, and finally bask in the fruits of their labor, which won't last long since the player must complete this again and again and again throughout the dungeon. That's 4 steps that result in Link just simply sinking. And then you have to repeat this again to take off the boots and float back up. And this is fortunately only present in Ocarina of Time, but is hands down the worst part of the game, as it puts the player in an unwanted and agonizing cycle of scrolling through menus and constantly pausing and unpausing, when all the player really wants to do is enjoy and experience the game. Thankfully, this is fixed in the 3DS remake, as the Iron and Hover Boots are no longer gear slots, but instead assignable items. In the N64 games, like I said, there were equipable gear slots that you had to pause the game and go back and put on. But in the 3DS remakes, they can be assigned to the buttons X and Y or the 2 touchscreen slots. This eliminates the pausing and unpausing monotony entirely and significantly adds to the user experience of the game. 4 steps are reduced down to just 1, and you don't even need to open the menu. Twilight Princess for the GameCube, Wii, and Wii U. The Zelda game that made grown men cry tears of joy, Twilight Princess. But does its HUD put tears in your eyes? Well, the GameCube version's HUD and UI are pretty similar to the N64 games due to Twilight Princess being somewhat of a spiritual successor to Ocarina of Time. But the Wii version is completely different. The Wii Remote is utilized entirely for the Wii version of the game, mapping the B button sword control in the GameCube controller to the waggling of the Wii Remote. The Wii version also takes advantage of the Wii Remote's D-pad to assign items, but there's a catch. Those D-pad items are on standby, and pressing the assign button on the D-pad then properly assigns the item to the B button on the back of the Wii Remote. Some dislike this decision and claim it's a roundabout way of assigning items, though I think it works fine in many circumstances. For example, while in a dungeon, the player would likely have D-pad slots open for items like potions, secondary items like the bow or claw shots, while the main B button item would be mapped to the primary dungeon item within that dungeon. This would allow the player to switch between 4 items seamlessly and not have to go through many menu visits to get their desired item. The HD port on the Wii U doesn't employ this method of assigning items and goes for the traditional GameCube approach, with items being assigned to 2 face buttons, X and Y, and 1 bumper button, R. The Wii U port also uses the Wii U gamepad as a place to select items and refer to the map, another factor in the game that leads to less pausing and halting of the game experience. The only thing lacking in this HD remaster is the fact that there isn't an option to clear the HUD of any unwanted icons like there was in the Wind Waker HD port. This is a small piece of criticism, as Twilight Princess has a less cluttered HUD and UI than Wind Waker. Skyward Sword for the Wii and soon to be on the Switch. And now we come to the most controversial game in the series, Skyward Sword. The Wii Swan Song had a lot to live up to, as it introduced an entirely unique and novel one-to-one motion-styled control scheme with the Wii's Motion Plus technology, allowing for precision swordplay and aiming. The basic HUD on the top of the screen is decent, with the Zelda staple of hearts and rupees along with an additional shield gauge this time around for your shield's durability. Where this game goes wrong is the default HUD of the game, showing a large Wii Remote icon on the right side of the screen, literally showing the player the sword and command controls, and a mini nunchuck on the bottom left hand of the screen, showing shield controls. This is definitely a highly unnecessary addition to the game, though thankfully, the game allows the player to toggle between 3 different HUD options. Standard mode is the annoying mode with the large Wii Remote and nunchuck being obtrusively noticeable on the screen. Light mode removes the Wii Remote and nunchuck, but still shows some basic controls on the right side, while Pro mode takes away all of that, leaving the player with just the hearts, rupees, shield gauge, and items on the top. This availability of options provided to the player is amazing and provides great accessibility to players, but in my humble opinion, standard mode should not have been implemented at all. Nintendo should have understood that players of this game would have been able to grasp the controls easily, as they did with the other games prior. In addition to these HUD icons, Skyward Sword is the first game in the series to add a stamina wheel to the mix, allowing Link to dash and climb for short periods of time. This wheel is thankfully only present when such icons take place and disappear when they are completed. When it comes to switching items, Skyward Sword excels. Items are exclusively left for the B button, where pressing it once activates the item assigned, while holding it down allows for the player to change their item using motion controls and without needing to go into a menu of any kind by pausing the game. This is also the case with secondary items reserved for the adventure pouch, such as potions and shields, but this is reserved for the minus button on the Wii Remote. Navigating through items without the need for pausing and looking through menus is a big step up in the series thanks to this game. Breath of the Wild on the Wii U and the Switch. And finally, we arrive at the Zelda team's magnum opus, Breath of the Wild. This game shakes up the Zelda formula quite a bit by adding an open world, eliminating traditional dungeons, and probably the greatest of all, adding an intricate and well-refined physics and chemistry engine to the mix. The HUD of Breath of the Wild is interesting, as it's the most unique in the series and adds new elements to the usual HUD found in the series. Of course you have hearts on the top where they usually are, but this time rupees are not present on the main gameplay HUD, but only in the pause menu. Under the hearts and on the left side of the screen is your loadout / primary items. The icon for the D-pad is used when item icons for each end of the D-pad to indicate which direction the player must choose for that item. Up for the Sheikah runes, right for shields and arrows, left for melee weapons and bows, and down is to call your horse. The player must hold down that direction on the D-pad and navigate their weapons and items with the right stick. This is very easy and seamless to do, and the way Sucker Punch's Ghost of Tsushima on the PS4 utilize its items and loadout change reminded me of this a lot. Under those are the divine powers given to Link, which show how many times you can use them until they go into cooldown. On the bottom right are the shrine locator, temperature gauge, weather/time, noise indicator, and finally the mini-map. One might say these are all too many to have on the screen at once, but they all work in tandem to give the player a good indication of their quest status. The weather and time help you determine when to properly perform actions depending on the time of day. The noise indicator helps you creep up onto enemies and horses in a stealthy manner. And the temperature gauge helps you determine how hot or cold you are. This can also be seen with Link's idle animations as well, which is a neat little addition if he's in a hot or cold environment in the game. Overall, the indicators are not too big and distracting and are all there to fill a purpose, which they most definitely do. And to those who don't like the presence of these icons and indicators, a Pro HUD mode is available, which only displays Link's hearts. Again, having this option is great and the game looks stunning when it's activated. But I also stand by the fact that the current HUD mode is not too big of a distraction to the overall gaming experience as much as it was with Skyward Sword. Breath of the Wild's menus take some notes from Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, with different pages for different purposes. There are pages for the adventure log, weapons, armors, treasures, and ingredients, and food, dishes and food as well. And of course, key items in the game. The only problem is that there are too many pages, and there's a lot of navigation that needs to be done to find a desired dish. The Legend of Zelda has evolved so much over its 35-year-long history, and there's been so many ups and downs along the way. One thing is clear for sure though, the Zelda team is incredibly dedicated to giving the player a seamless and memorable user experience. This is seen with the evolution of the HUDs, UI, and overall user experience of each entry in the Zelda series. As seen in the many user interfaces and experiences we have analyzed, we can conclude that Nintendo only wants the best experience possible for all Zelda fans. Thanks so much for watching this video. I had a great time making it, writing it, and doing everything for it. I hope you enjoyed it. And remember, if you enjoyed this video, to give it a like, subscribe to my channel, Niche Quick Pops, if you are interested in video games and video game analysis, and comment down below, what's your favorite Zelda game, which Zelda game did you enjoy the most, and which do you think has the most unique user interface. Also, down below will be the article that I wrote for this video, which I did for a class and for my website that I created, so be sure to check that out if you can. This is Niche Quick, signing off. Have a good day.